"You need a home, and I need a mommy," said the little girl to the mail-order bride. The train pulled into Copper Springs Station with a great hissing of steam and a screech of iron wheels against the tracks. Eleanor Mitchell gripped her small carpet bag tighter, her knuckles white against the worn leather handle. Through the grimy window, she could see the platform stretching out before her, dotted with people waiting for loved ones, for cargo, for hope to arrive on steel rails. She was someone's hope, she supposed, or at least she was meant to be. The advertisement had been simple enough, tucked into the back pages of a Boston newspaper that had been left behind at the boarding house where she worked as a maid. Widower seeks wife, must be willing to relocate to Montana Territory. Comfortable home provided. Correspondence welcome. It had been the word home that had caught her attention, that had made her fingers tremble as she carefully tore the small square of newsprint from the page. Home. It was such a simple word, yet Eleanor had never truly known its meaning. Orphaned at 7, she had spent her childhood being shuffled between relatives who saw her as a burden, then workhouses that saw her as cheap labor, and finally the boarding house where Mrs. Pritchard paid her barely enough to afford a shared room in the attic and 2 meals a day. At 23, Eleanor had nothing to her name but a single trunk of clothes, a locket that had belonged to her mother, and a desperate, aching need for something more. The correspondence with Thomas Brennan had been brief but promising. He was a rancher. He had written in a strong, practical hand. His wife had died 3 years past, and he had a daughter who needed a mother's care. He was not a man of many words, he had admitted, but he was honest and hardworking and could provide a good life. Eleanor had written back, describing herself truthfully if not thoroughly, a woman of average appearance with brown hair and gray eyes who could cook and clean and sew, who had no family to speak of and no prospects worth mentioning. 3 letters later, he had sent money for a train ticket. Now, as Eleanor stepped off the train and onto the wooden platform, she felt the weight of that decision pressing down on her shoulders. The air here was different than Boston, cleaner somehow, tinged with pine and something wild she could not name. The sky stretched endlessly above her, a blue so vast it made her dizzy to look at it. She scanned the platform, searching for a face that matched the description Thomas had provided. Tall, he had written, dark hair going gray at the temples. She would know him by his hat, a black Stetson with a silver band. But as the crowd thinned and the other passengers were claimed by their waiting parties, Eleanor found herself standing alone, her carpet bag growing heavier by the moment. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Perhaps he had seen her through the window and decided she was not what he had hoped for. Perhaps this had all been a terrible mistake, and she would have to find a way to survive in this strange, sprawling place, with nothing but the few dollars she had sewn into the hem of her dress. Eleanor was just beginning to contemplate the logistics of finding work in a town she knew nothing about, when she heard a small voice behind her. "Are you the lady who is going to marry my papa?" She turned to find a child standing there, a girl of perhaps 6 or 7 years old with a riot of dark curls escaping from beneath a bonnet that had seen better days. Her dress was clean but wrinkled, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek that suggested she had been playing somewhere she probably should not have been. But it was her eyes that caught Eleanor's attention, large and brown and filled with a wariness that seemed far too old for such a young face. "I beg your pardon?" Eleanor asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The girl studied her for a long moment, her head tilted to one side like a bird examining something curious. "Papa said you were coming on the train today. He said I was supposed to wait in the wagon, but I got tired of waiting. Are you her? The lady from the letters?" "I am Eleanor Mitchell," Eleanor said, kneeling down so she was eye level with the child. "And you must be—" "Lily," the girl said. "Lily Ann Brennan. I am 7 years old and I have a pony named Biscuit and a papa who forgets to brush my hair in the mornings." She paused, considering. "Are you going to be my new mother?" The question was asked with the blunt directness that only children possessed, without pretense or politeness to soften its edges. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest, a recognition of something familiar in this small, serious face. She had been this child once, had asked similar questions of the aunts and cousins who had taken her in with reluctant charity, had searched their faces for some sign that she might belong. "I suppose that depends on many things," Eleanor said carefully. "On whether your father and I suit each other, on whether you and I can become friends." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. "My last governess said she wanted to be my friend too, but then she left because she said Papa was impossible to work for and I was a little savage." She paused, then added with a hint of defiance, "I'm not a savage. I just do not like sitting still for lessons when I could be riding Biscuit." Despite herself, Eleanor felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I have never been particularly good at sitting still myself," she admitted. "Perhaps we might find something to agree on after all." Before Lily could respond, a man came rushing around the corner of the station building, his long legs eating up the distance between them with urgent strides. He was tall, just as he had described, with dark hair that was indeed shot through with silver at the temples. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore the black Stetson with the silver band, slightly askew as if he had jammed it on his head in a hurry. "Lily Ann Brennan," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried clearly across the platform. "I told you to stay in the wagon." Lily did not seem particularly repentant. "You were taking too long, Papa, and I found her. She's not as pretty as Mama was, but she has kind eyes." Eleanor felt heat flood her cheeks at the child's artless assessment, but Thomas Brennan did not seem to notice. He was too busy looking at her with an expression she could not quite decipher, something between relief and resignation, and perhaps a touch of hope. "Miss Mitchell," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed almost rusty with disuse. "I apologize for my daughter. She has not had much in the way of proper guidance these past years." "There is no need to apologize," Eleanor said, rising to her feet and brushing off her skirts. "She was only curious. I would have been curious too, in her place." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, a brief softening that was gone almost before she could register it. "The wagon is just around the corner. It is about an hour's ride to the ranch. I can have someone come back for your trunk." "This is all I have," Eleanor said, gesturing to her carpet bag. Thomas looked at the small bag, then back at her face, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. He did not comment on it, did not offer pity or ask questions she did not want to answer. He simply nodded and reached out to take the bag from her hand. "Then we should get going before we lose the light." The wagon ride was largely silent, broken only by Lily's chatter about Biscuit and the ranch and the creek where she liked to catch frogs in the summer. Thomas drove the horses with practiced ease, his large hands steady on the reins, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Eleanor sat beside him on the wagon seat, acutely aware of the space between them, of the way his sleeve occasionally brushed against hers when the wagon hit a rut in the road. The land around them was beautiful in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. Rolling hills covered in tall grass that rippled like waves in the wind. Mountains rising in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warmth of the spring afternoon. Wildflowers scattered across the meadows in bursts of yellow and purple and white. It was so different from the cramped gray streets of Boston that Eleanor felt as if she had traveled not just across the country, but to another world entirely. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill, and Eleanor felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. It was a solid structure, built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and a stone chimney that promised warmth against the cold Montana winters. There was a barn off to one side, painted a faded red, and a corral where several horses grazed peacefully. Beyond the buildings, the land stretched out in all directions, vast and open and free. "It is not much," Thomas said, and there was something almost defensive in his voice, "but it is home. Home." There was that word again, the word that had brought her here, the word she had been chasing all her life. "It is beautiful," Eleanor said, and meant it. That first night, Eleanor lay in the small bedroom that had been prepared for her, a room that had clearly once been used for storage and had been hastily cleared and cleaned for her arrival. The bed was narrow but comfortable, the quilt soft and worn from many washings. Through the thin walls, she could hear the wind moving across the land, a sound so different from the noise of the city that it took her a long time to fall asleep. She woke to the sound of crying. At first, she thought she had dreamed it, a remnant of her own childhood nightmares bleeding into wakefulness. But then she heard it again, a soft, muffled sobbing coming from somewhere down the hall. Without thinking, she rose from her bed and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, padding barefoot across the cold wooden floor. She found Lily in her room at the end of the hall, curled into a small ball beneath her covers, her whole body shaking with the force of her tears. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the tracks of moisture on her cheeks, the way she clutched a small worn doll to her chest. "Lily?" Eleanor whispered, hovering in the doorway. "What is wrong?" The girl's head shot up, her eyes wide with surprise, and something that looked almost like fear. "I did not mean to wake anyone," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I was trying to be quiet. Papa does not like it when I cry." Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest, a fissure of understanding that let her own buried grief seep through. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of Lily's bed, close enough to be present, but not so close as to crowd her. "Everyone cries sometimes," Eleanor said softly. "Even grown-ups, even papas, though they might not let us see it." Lily sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve in a way that would have scandalized any proper governess. "I was dreaming about Mama," she whispered. "I dream about her sometimes, but when I wake up, I cannot remember what she looked like anymore. I try and try, but her face is all fuzzy, like looking through fog." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. What if I forget her completely? What if one day I cannot remember her at all? Eleanor reached out and gently brushed a curl back from Lily's face, a gesture so natural it surprised her. She'd never been particularly comfortable with children, had never had much opportunity to be around them. But something about this little girl, with her fierce independence and her hidden wounds, spoke to a part of Eleanor she had thought long buried. "Can I tell you something?" Eleanor asked. "Something I have never told anyone before." Lily nodded, her eyes still glistening but her sobs beginning to quiet. "My mother died when I was just a bit older than you," Eleanor said, "and I had the same fear. I was terrified that I would forget her, that one day I would not be able to picture her face or remember the sound of her voice. And do you know what? Some of the details did fade. I cannot always remember exactly what she looked like, but I remember the way she made me feel. Safe and loved and like I belonged somewhere. Those feelings never went away, not even when everything else got fuzzy. Your mama loved you, Lily. That love is inside you now, and it will never go away, no matter what you remember or forget." Lily was quiet for a long moment, considering this. Then, in a voice so small Eleanor almost did not hear it, she said, "You need a home, and I need a mommy." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow, so simple and so true that she felt tears prick at her own eyes. "What makes you say that?" she managed. Lily shrugged, a gesture that was somehow both childish and ancient. "I heard Mrs. Patterson talking after church last week. She said mail-order brides are women who have nothing and are looking for a place to belong. Is that true? Do you have nothing?" Eleanor thought about lying, about offering some polite fiction that would preserve her dignity. But there was something about this child, about her direct questions and her wounded eyes, that demanded honesty. "I do not have much," Eleanor admitted. "No family, no home of my own. But I have myself, and I have hope, and I have a chance to make something new here. That is not nothing, I think." "Papa is sad," Lily said, abruptly changing the subject in the way children often did. "He does not laugh anymore, not like he used to when Mama was here. He works all the time and he forgets to eat dinner, and sometimes he looks at me like he does not know what to do with me." She paused, clutching her doll tighter. "I think maybe I remind him of Mama too much. I think maybe it hurts him to look at me." Eleanor felt her heart break a little more. She thought about Thomas Brennan, about the stiffness in his manner and the weariness in his eyes, about the way he had answered her letters with such brief, practical words. She had assumed he was simply a man of few sentiments, but now she wondered if perhaps he was a man drowning in sentiments he did not know how to express. "Your papa loves you," Eleanor said firmly. "Sometimes grown-ups are not very good at showing it, especially when they are sad. But I saw the way he looked at you today, the way he came running when he realized you had left the wagon. He loves you more than anything in the world, Lily. He just needs a little help remembering how to show it." "Will you help him remember?" Lily asked. It was such a large question, wrapped in such small words. Eleanor thought about the life she had left behind, the empty rooms and the endless work and the bone-deep loneliness that had followed her like a shadow. She thought about the journey she had made, the leap of faith she had taken in coming here. She thought about this little girl, so brave and so broken, asking for something Eleanor was not sure she knew how to give. "I will try," Eleanor said. "That is all I can promise. But I will try." Lily nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. Then, with the mercurial nature of childhood, her expression shifted to something almost shy. "Would you stay until I fall asleep? Mama used to sing to me, but I do not think you have to sing if you do not want to. Just stay." Eleanor did not hesitate. She shifted on the bed, leaning back against the headboard and opening her arms in silent invitation. Lily hesitated only a moment before crawling into her lap, curling up against Eleanor's chest like a small, warm animal seeking shelter. Eleanor wrapped her arms around the child and began to hum softly, a melody she half remembered from her own childhood, from before her mother had gotten sick, from when the world had still felt safe. By the time Lily's breathing had evened out into sleep, Eleanor's legs were numb and her back was aching, but she did not move. She sat in the moonlit room, holding this child who was not hers, but who had claimed a piece of her heart anyway, and she thought about what it might mean to be a mother, not just in the legal sense, not just in the arrangement she had agreed to when she had answered that advertisement, but in the way that mattered, the way that meant late nights and lullabies, and being there when the nightmares came. She was still sitting there when Thomas appeared in the doorway. He looked different in the darkness, softer somehow, the hard lines of his face smoothed by shadow. He was wearing a simple shirt, untucked, and his feet were bare. His hair was mussed from sleep, and Eleanor realized with a start that he must have heard the crying too, must have come to check on his daughter, only to find someone else already there. "She has nightmares," Thomas said quietly, his voice rough with something that might have been sleep or might have been emotion. "Ever since her mother died, I never know what to say to her. She just needs to know someone is there," Eleanor said, equally quiet. "She needs to know she is not alone." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Eleanor to his sleeping daughter and back again. "Her mother was better at this," he said finally, "at the soft things. I never learned how." "It is not too late to learn," Eleanor said. "She is still here. She still needs you." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. "Why did you come here, Miss Mitchell? Really? A woman like you, educated and well-spoken, you could have found work anywhere. You could have made a life for yourself that did not involve marrying a stranger in the middle of nowhere." It was the most he had said to her at once since she had arrived. Eleanor considered her answer carefully, stroking Lily's hair as the child slept on, oblivious to the conversation happening above her head. "Because I have spent my whole life on the outside of other people's lives," Eleanor said. "Working in their homes, caring for their children, watching their families from a distance. I wanted something of my own, a place where I belonged, not because someone was paying me to be there, but because someone chose me." She paused, meeting Thomas's eyes in the darkness. "Your advertisement did not promise love. It did not promise happiness, but it promised a home, and that was enough for me to take the chance." Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Eleanor thought she had said too much, been too honest. But then he nodded slowly, as if something had shifted into place inside him. "I cannot promise love either," he said. "I do not know if I have it in me anymore, but I can promise respect and partnership and a home for as long as you want it, and I can promise to try, with Lily, to be better." "That is enough for now," Eleanor said. "We can figure out the rest as we go." The weeks that followed were not easy. There were awkward silences and miscommunications, moments when Eleanor felt like an intruder in someone else's life, moments when Thomas retreated into himself and could not be reached. But there were other moments too, moments when Lily would slip her small hand into Eleanor's while they walked to the chicken coop, moments when Thomas would pause at the door before heading out to the fields, turning back to ask if there was anything she needed. Moments when they would all three sit on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and something that felt almost like peace would settle over them. The wedding was a simple affair, held in the small church in town with only a handful of neighbors in attendance. Eleanor wore her best dress, a blue calico that Mrs. Patterson had helped her alter, and carried wildflowers that Lily had picked that morning. Thomas wore a suit that looked stiff and uncomfortable on him, but his eyes were warm when he took her hand and spoke his vows. That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed in the room that was now theirs, she found a small piece of paper that had been slipped under her pillow. She unfolded it to find a child's drawing, done in the careful, wobbly lines of someone just learning to write. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a house, 2 tall and 1 small, their stick arms linked together. Beneath the drawing, in letters that tilted and stumbled across the page, were the words, "My Family," by Lily Brennan. Eleanor pressed the paper to her heart and let the tears come. Tears of grief for all the years she had spent alone. Tears of joy for this unexpected gift she had been given. She was still crying when Thomas came in, and instead of pulling away or asking what was wrong, he simply sat beside her on the bed and put his arm around her shoulders, holding her while she wept. "She asked me this morning if she could call you Mama," Thomas said quietly, when Eleanor's tears had finally subsided. "I told her she would have to ask you herself." "And what did she say?" Thomas's lips curved into the first real smile Eleanor had seen from him, a smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost handsome. She said she already knew the answer. She said she could tell from the first day, when you knelt down to talk to her at the train station. She said anyone who knelt down to be at eye level with a child was someone who understood what it meant to be small and scared. Eleanor thought about that moment on the platform, about the serious little face and the 2 old eyes and the question that had cut straight to the heart of everything. You need a home, and I need a mommy. It had been true then, and it was true now, and somehow, against all odds, they had found each other. "I would be honored to be her mama," Eleanor said, "if she will have me." The next morning, when Lily came bounding into the kitchen for breakfast, she stopped short at the sight of Eleanor standing at the stove. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, the old wariness creeping back in. "Good morning," Eleanor said, keeping her voice light. "I made pancakes. Your father said they were your favorite." Lily approached slowly, her eyes searching Eleanor's face for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because her expression softened into something that was almost a smile. "Good morning," she said. Then, so quietly that Eleanor almost missed it, "Good morning, Mama." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and precious and new. Eleanor felt her heart swell with an emotion she could not name, something bigger than happiness, deeper than joy. She set down her spatula and opened her arms, and Lily flew into them, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor Mitchell Brennan understood what it meant to be home.